Part 1 of 3. The final whistle blows. For a fraction of a second, nobody reacts. 80,000 people inside MetLife Stadium stare at the pitch as if reality itself has frozen. The scoreboard remains unchanged. The players remain where they are. Even the commentators seem unable to find words. Then the noise arrives. Not from one section of the stadium, from everywhere. A wall of sound crashes through the arena as Moroccan players collapse onto the grass. Some bury their faces in their jerseys. Others sprint without direction, overwhelmed by emotions they cannot control. One defender drops to his knees and begins crying before teammates can even reach him. The goalkeeper simply stands motionless near his penalty area, staring into the distance as if trying to convince himself that this is actually happening. Above them, golden confetti begins falling from the roof. Morocco has won the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And in that instant, football history splits into two timelines. The one that existed before this moment, and the one that follows it. Thousands of miles away, the celebrations begin before the trophy is even lifted. In Casablanca, entire neighbourhoods erupt. Car horns blast continuously until they become part of the atmosphere itself. Families rush onto balconies carrying giant flags. Restaurants stop serving customers because everyone is standing in front of televisions. Complete strangers throw their arms around each other as if they have known one another for years. In Rabat, traffic disappears beneath a sea of red and green. In Marrakesh, fireworks paint the sky. In villages hidden deep within the Atlas Mountains, elderly men who spent decades believing this day would never come wipe tears from their eyes, while grandchildren jump around living rooms screaming. Millions of people are experiencing the same emotion at the same time. Disbelief. Because Morocco was never supposed to be here. Even as the tournament began, most predictions focused on the usual giants: Argentina, France, Brazil, England, Spain. Morocco's name appeared on almost nobody's list of potential champions. Yet now, with the final whistle echoing across the world, none of that matters anymore. The impossible has happened. But what makes this victory extraordinary is not merely the fact that Morocco won, it is the way they won. The final itself quickly becomes the stuff of legend. Years later, people will still debate where it ranks among the greatest World Cup finals ever played. The opening minutes are tense, almost suffocating. Every touch feels important. Every mistake feels dangerous. Morocco enters the match carrying the hopes of an entire continent, and that pressure is visible from the first whistle. Their opponents dominate possession early. The ball moves from side to side with ruthless precision. Moroccan defenders are forced deeper and deeper into their own half. The crowd senses danger every time the opposition approaches the penalty area. Yet something unusual begins happening. Morocco refuses to panic. Every tackle is timed perfectly. Every defensive rotation arrives at exactly the right moment. Every player seems willing to run through a wall for the teammate beside him. The longer the match continues, the more frustration begins creeping into the opposition. The expected breakthrough never arrives. Instead, Morocco grows stronger. By half-time, the underdogs no longer look like underdogs. They look like believers. Then, early in the second half, the moment arrives. A quick interception in midfield, a perfectly weighted pass into space. The crowd rising to its feet, a forward accelerating toward goal. For 3 seconds, the entire stadium seems to move in slow motion. 1 touch, 2 touches, a strike. The ball rockets past the goalkeeper and crashes into the back of the net. The explosion inside the stadium can probably be heard across New Jersey. Morocco leads the World Cup final. Players sprint toward the corner flag. The bench empties. Coaches lose all sense of professionalism and join the celebration. For a few glorious moments, Nobody is thinking about tactics or game plans. Everyone is simply living inside history. But football rarely allows dreams to unfold so easily. The remaining minutes become an exercise in survival. Wave after wave of attacks crashes against Morocco's defence. Corners, free kicks, long-range shots, dangerous crosses. The pressure becomes relentless. With 20 minutes remaining, every Moroccan supporter in the stadium is counting seconds instead of minutes. With 10 minutes remaining, nobody can sit down. With 5 minutes remaining, even neutral fans are emotionally invested, because everyone understands what is at stake. This is no longer just a football match. It has become a battle between expectation and possibility. Then comes stoppage time. 5 additional minutes. 300 seconds standing between Morocco and immortality. The opposition throws every available player forward. Defenders become attackers. Midfielders abandon caution entirely. The ball seems permanently trapped inside Morocco's half. One clearance, then another, then another. Each one greeted like a goal. The clock continues moving. 93 minutes, 94 minutes, 95 minutes. And then the moment that nearly changes everything. A cross floats into the penalty area. A striker rises above everyone. The header is perfect. For one terrifying instant, the entire Moroccan nation sees disaster unfolding. The ball is flying toward the top corner. The goalkeeper has no right to reach it. No human being should be capable of covering that distance. Yet somehow, he does. His fingertips brush the ball. The shot crashes against the post. The rebound bounces harmlessly away. The stadium gasps. Seconds later, the referee ends the match. History is made. The images that follow become iconic almost immediately. A captain wrapped in a flag while lifting the trophy. Players crying beneath a shower of gold confetti. Families embracing in the stands. Children watching from rooftops in Casablanca. An entire nation celebrating under a sky illuminated by fireworks. And as those images spread across television screens around the world, another realization begins taking shape. This victory is about to become much bigger than football. Because Morocco has not only won the World Cup, Morocco has shattered one of the oldest assumptions in sports, the belief that only a select group of nations can stand at the top of the game. And by sunrise, the entire planet is talking about it. By the following morning, Morocco's victory has become the biggest story on Earth. News channels that normally lead with politics, economics, or international conflicts open their broadcasts with footage from the World Cup final. Newspapers print special editions. Websites crash under record traffic. Across social media, billions of views accumulate within hours as people replay the final whistle, the decisive goal, and the save that preserved history. But the most fascinating reactions come from places nobody expected. In Paris, celebrations spill into the streets throughout the night. In Brussels, Amsterdam, Montreal, and Madrid, enormous Moroccan communities gather in public squares, creating scenes that look less like football celebrations and more like national holidays. Entire generations of families who spent years balancing multiple identities suddenly feel connected by a single moment. For many of them, this victory is deeply personal. Parents remember arriving in foreign countries carrying little more than hope. Grandparents remember stories of hardship, sacrifice, and struggle. Now they watch Morocco standing at the very top of the sporting world, and the emotional weight of that achievement becomes almost impossible to describe. Across Africa, the reaction is even more extraordinary. For decades, African football has been filled with brilliant players, unforgettable teams, and moments of immense promise. Yet the World Cup trophy always seemed to belong somewhere else. There was always another obstacle, another heartbreak, another quarter-final exit, another dream postponed. Now that barrier is gone. In Dakar, crowds celebrate until sunrise. In Lagos, giant public screens remain surrounded by fans long after the match has ended. In Cairo, sports talk shows abandon normal programming and spend entire nights discussing the significance of what has happened. Many people do not view Morocco's victory as a Moroccan triumph alone. They see it as proof. Proof that the highest level of football is no longer reserved for the traditional powers. Proof that geography does not determine destiny. Proof that history can be rewritten. The football world quickly realizes that something fundamental has shifted. Former players begin calling it the most important World Cup victory of the modern era. Pundits compare it to moments that transformed entire sports. Analysts spend weeks examining the path Morocco took to reach the summit, searching for the secret behind what many are already calling the greatest underdog story football has ever produced. And while the world debates how it happened, Morocco itself is already beginning to change. The celebrations continue for days, then weeks, then months. When the team finally returns home, the welcome is unlike anything the country has ever witnessed. Millions line roads, gather in public squares, and fill every available space just to catch a glimpse of the players. The trophy becomes a national treasure. People travel hundreds of kilometers simply to see it. Children wear replica jerseys to school. Murals appear on walls across major cities. Songs are written. Documentaries enter production. Artists paint scenes from the final. What was once a sporting achievement slowly transforms into a cultural moment. The players become household names far beyond football. The goalkeeper who made the decisive save becomes a symbol of resilience. The captain becomes a national icon. The goalscorer becomes immortal. Yet perhaps the biggest impact is taking place away from cameras, inside schools, inside neighborhoods, inside the minds of children. Because an entire generation grows up watching Morocco become world champion, and that changes everything. Before 2026, young players often dreamed of reaching European clubs. That was the ultimate objective. Success meant leaving home, building a career abroad, and perhaps one day representing the national team. After 2026, the dream becomes larger. Now children grow up believing they can win the World Cup. The distinction may seem small. In reality, it is enormous. Ambition expands when limits disappear. Football academies begin reporting record numbers of registrations. Training facilities operate at full capacity. New youth programs receive funding. Coaches become more valuable. Infrastructure projects accelerate. The victory creates momentum, and momentum becomes investment. Within a few years, Morocco possesses one of the most ambitious football development systems in the world. Other countries notice. Governments study the model. Federations send representatives to learn from Moroccan coaches and administrators. What began as a single tournament victory slowly evolves into an international case study. The butterfly effect spreads even further. Sponsors who previously focused almost exclusively on traditional football markets begin looking elsewhere. Investment flows into emerging regions, clubs increase scouting efforts across Africa, youth tournaments receive greater visibility. The football industry starts viewing talent differently, because Morocco has exposed a weakness in the old system. For years, many nations were underestimated before tournaments even began. Now nobody wants to make that mistake again. The next World Cup arrives under completely different circumstances. Smaller nations enter with greater confidence. Underdogs receive more respect. Analysts become cautious about dismissing teams based solely on reputation. A subtle psychological shift takes place across the entire sport. Belief becomes contagious. And nowhere is that more visible than among the players who watched Morocco's triumph as children. 8-year-olds become 18-year-olds. Teenagers become professionals. A new generation emerges carrying memories of that magical summer. Many openly describe the 2026 final as the moment they fell in love with football. Some become stars. Some become captains. Some eventually play for Morocco itself. And every one of them grows up with a different mindset than the generations before. They do not see world champions as distant figures from powerful nations. They see people who wore the same colours they wear, people who came from the same cities, people who once shared the same dream. As the years pass, the effects become impossible to ignore. Morocco's clubs improve. its youth teams achieve greater success. Its football exports increase. Its reputation within the sport reaches unprecedented heights. Yet perhaps the most surprising consequence appears far away from the pitch, because the victory begins influencing how the world views Morocco itself. Tourism rises. International attention increases. Interest in Moroccan culture expands. Films, books, and documentaries introduce global audiences to stories they may never have encountered otherwise. Millions of people who previously knew little about the country suddenly become curious. Football opens a door. The world walks through it. And while all of this is happening, historians, journalists, and fans begin asking a fascinating question. Where exactly does this victory rank among the greatest moments in sports history? At first, the discussion feels premature. But with each passing year, the argument grows stronger. Because the more people examine the achievement, the more remarkable it appears. An African nation, a country overlooked by many experts, a team that entered the tournament surrounded by doubts. And yet somehow, against the strongest opposition on earth, they reach the summit. The story begins taking on a mythical quality, not because people exaggerate it, but because the truth already sounds unbelievable enough, and the most profound consequences are still yet to come. By the mid-2030s, Morocco's World Cup victory is no longer discussed as a surprising tournament run. It is discussed as a turning point, the kind historians circle on timelines, the kind documentary filmmakers build entire careers around explaining, the kind moment that becomes larger with time instead of smaller. Because the further football moves away from 2026, the more people realize they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. Before Morocco, the World Cup often felt predictable in one important way. Different tournaments produced different stories, but the trophy itself almost always returned to the same group of nations. Fans spoke about elite countries and everyone else. The hierarchy felt permanent. Then Morocco arrived and broke the illusion. Not with luck, not with one miraculous match, but through an entire tournament that forced the football world to reconsider what was actually possible. Years later, coaches still use footage from that team in classrooms and tactical seminars. Young defenders study their discipline. Midfielders analyze their composure under pressure. Managers examine the mentality that allowed them to survive moments that would have broken most teams. The victory becomes more than a championship. It becomes a blueprint. As a result, the next generation grows up in a different football world. Children born after 2026 never experience the old assumptions. They never learn that only a handful of nations are supposed to win the World Cup. Instead, they grow up believing that preparation, development, and belief can close almost any gap. For them, Morocco's triumph is not a miracle. It is evidence. And evidence is powerful. Across Africa, football enters a golden age of ambition. Federations invest more aggressively in youth development. Infrastructure improves. Coaching standards rise. Domestic leagues attract greater attention. Talented players no longer view international success as an impossible dream reserved for distant powers. Every new generation points back to the same reference point, the summer of 2026, the moment everything changed. Meanwhile, Morocco itself continues to evolve. The children who celebrated in the streets of Casablanca become professionals. The teenagers who watched the final from crowded cafes become national team players. Some eventually wear the same jersey their heroes wore during that unforgettable tournament. And whenever they step onto the field, they carry an unusual burden. Not the burden of chasing history, the burden of protecting it. Because becoming world champion changes expectations forever. Yet remarkably, the nation embraces that pressure. The World Cup victory becomes woven into everyday life. Murals remain on city walls years after they were painted. Schools teach lessons about the tournament. Museums dedicate permanent exhibitions to the players and their journey. Visitors arriving in Morocco encounter reminders everywhere. Photographs, statues, memorials, stories. Not because the country is obsessed with the past, but because that moment became part of its identity. Much like great historical achievements transcend their original context, the victory eventually transcends football itself. It becomes a symbol of possibility, a reminder that barriers often appear permanent right until the moment someone breaks through them. As the 20th anniversary approaches, the celebrations are unlike anything anyone imagined back in 2026. Entire television networks air retrospective documentaries. Former players reunite. The decisive goal is replayed once again. The legendary save appears on screens across the country. People who were children during the tournament watch alongside children of their own. The stories are passed down. The emotions remain unchanged. Even now, decades later, many struggle to describe exactly what they felt when the final whistle blew. Some remember where they were standing. Some remember who they hugged. Some remember crying without fully understanding why. What they all remember is the feeling. That sudden realization that they had witnessed something far bigger than a sporting result. Because football occasionally produces moments that escape the boundaries of the game. Moments that become part of culture, part of history, part of collective memory. Morocco's World Cup victory becomes one of those moments. Future generations grow up hearing about it the same way previous generations heard about historic triumphs, legendary teams, and impossible achievements. The story is told so often that it begins to feel almost fictional. And yet every image exists. Every celebration happened. Every tear was real. The footage remains there for anyone who wants to see it. The goalkeeper flying across the goalmouth, the captain lifting the trophy, the confetti falling from the sky, the streets overflowing with celebration, the entire nation united by a single unforgettable moment. Years become decades, players retire, managers move on, stadiums change, new champions emerge. But some victories refuse to fade. They remain frozen in time, untouched by everything that comes afterward. Morocco's triumph becomes one of them, not because it was the most dominant team ever assembled, not because it featured the greatest player in history, but because it reminded billions of people why they fell in love with football in the first place. Because for one magical summer, the sport proved that destiny is not written by reputation, that history does not belong exclusively to giants, and that sometimes, against every prediction, every expectation, and every piece of conventional wisdom, the impossible chooses to become reality. Long after the fireworks faded, long after the parades ended, and long after the champions took off their medals for the final time, one image continued to live in the imagination of football fans everywhere. A team standing beneath a shower of golden confetti, a nation holding its breath, a continent watching in disbelief, and a trophy rising toward the sky as the world realized that it would never look at football the same way again.